Our next witness is Major Franklin. You may begin.
Good morning, Chairman McClintock. Honorable committee members, thank you for allowing me to testify today. My name is Major Neill Franklin. I am retired. I'm here today representing myself, having served a 34-year law enforcement career in the Baltimore Police Department and the Maryland State Police, as well as representing the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, LEAP, where I was the executive director for an additional 10 years post-retirement. Lieutenant Diane Goldstein is now the current executive director. LEAP is a nonprofit law enforcement, nonprofit group of police prosecutors, judges, other criminal justice professionals who speak from firsthand experience. Our mission is to make communities safer by focusing law enforcement resources on the greatest threats to public safety and working toward improving police-community relations. While we strongly believe that effective border security is imperative to public safety, we adamantly oppose any proposals that will push sanctuary cities and mandate state and local law enforcement to play a significant role in enforcement of federal immigration law. We believe routine civil immigration enforcement by local officers would harm public safety by eroding police community trust and diverting law enforcement resources away from tackling more serious crime. Ordering state and local law enforcement to act as ICE agents would deeply damage police community trust that we depend upon to do our jobs effectively. Across policing, the research underscores that having trust from the people we serve directly impacts public safety. Police are only as strong as the relationships we have with the public. We can only prevent, detect, and solve crimes if witnesses and victims are willing to come forward to report criminal activity and work with us to address it. A report on Latino perceptions of police found that 44% of Latinos hesitate to report crime to police for fear that it could lead to investigations into immigration status of their family or community members, even if they are legal citizens. Compelling local police to enforce federal immigration law would only further damage community trust, making victims, witnesses, and other residents less likely to report crimes or provide critical information to help us solve them. Forcing local law enforcement to act as federal immigration agents would also divert their focus away from the greatest threats to public safety. Local law enforcement should not be forced to dedicate precious time and resources toward burdensome information sharing and detainer requirements instead of solving serious crime. It would lead to countless people being detained for extended periods solely based upon their immigration status, wasting limited jail space that should be reserved for those who pose the most serious threats to public safety. Proposed bans to sanctuary cities also pose constitutional and civil liabilities for local police departments and jails, exposing them to costly lawsuits that could further drain their already stretched resources. Many cities across the country have been forced to pay massive settlements for illegally holding people based upon requested ICE detainers, a practice that would become more frequent as police hope to avoid cuts to essential federal programs in their communities. For example, New York City recently agreed to a $92.5 million settlement stemming from a lawsuit claiming authorities had detained 20,000 people for days, weeks, even months after their scheduled release date due to ICE detainer requests. The proposed act would put state and local governments in an impossible position of deciding between risking cuts to essential federal programs or inviting potential legal action for violating the civil rights of their community members. Furthermore, one solution does not fit all. Cities and towns are unique with very different needs, requiring different solutions for various problems. Each community should be free to design its own strategies absent sanctions of any kind from the federal government. We are deeply concerned to see the federal government considering blocking federal funds to sanctuary jurisdictions and mandating local law enforcement to act as ICE agents. Forcing local police to act as federal immigration agents would harm public safety by eroding community trust and diverting critical resources away from more serious crime. Thanks again for having me.
Can you help us understand this statistic and why jurisdictions with community trust policies in place experience less crime and why their residents feel safer?
Yes. So to be effective, and a good part of my career was in criminal investigation for quite a few years. And we first need to get people to report crimes before we can even begin to investigate them. And when there's no trust between the police and the community, many people will not even report crimes. And this hasn't just become evident with the immigrant community. I grew up in West Baltimore, and I experienced times in my neighborhood where we really had trust issues. Many of my friends, many people that I knew would not even report the crime of a robbery, of being a victim of a crime. And then we need witnesses. Once we begin to investigate a crime, we need witnesses. So you have to have that trust that we, the police, are going to do the right thing. And in the immigrant community, if they believe, just believe that their immigration status is going to be questioned, or maybe that of another family member, or that of a community member which they are friends with, they're not going to cooperate with us. We've seen this time and time again, but when you can establish that trust, you see, we cannot be effective in solving crimes, and most of the people who commit the violence is a very small number.
Right.
If we can get them, if we can focus on them, get them convicted, charged convicted, then we have a great chance of reducing crime.
I just have a few seconds left here, but jurisdictions that adopted sanctuary policies experienced a 52 to 62% reduction in the domestic homicide rate for Hispanic women. Does that track with your experience as a law enforcement officer in jurisdictions with those policies?
Yes, as creating the first domestic violence unit in the Maryland State Police, as being the president of Turnaround Incorporated, which was about domestic violence in Baltimore City, shelter services and counseling services, yes, those numbers are very familiar to me. And there's a great report out, I believe
Time's expired.
Well, usually the witness can finish answering.
Mr. Tiffany.
Major Franklin, why is building trust with all members of the community so important to policing?
I think you touched on something, sir, regarding the importance of, it's not just for keeping members of the immigrant community safe, because this very small number of violent offenders also prey on people outside of that community as well. So as soon as we can get the reporting of the crime, the cooperation from witnesses to have that person arrested, charged, convicted, and get them off the streets and hold them responsible, the better for not just the immigrant community, but the entire community.
Is it fair to say then that if minority communities, immigrants, or really any part of your community feels unsafe going to the police, that it makes everyone in the jurisdiction less safe? And can you explain
Absolutely.
why?
Again, because the importance of that trust, and this isn't something new, by the way. We've experienced the same thing with underserved communities where there's no trust with the police, and we fail to get an accuracy regarding the crimes because they're not reported. There's no trust in reporting the crime because they don't believe the police are going to do the right things, and in many cases, they believe the police may cause them some sort of harm. In the immigrant community, it's about being deported, and not just the victim or the witness being deported, but that victim or witness can be friends or relative of someone else who might be undocumented, and they fear that deportation, so there's going to be limited, if any communication, any cooperation at all with the authorities. And it's not just about communicating with the police, it's about fearing interacting with other positions of authority and services within the city who they believe they may have some sort of relationship with law enforcement. They want to ensure that them and their friends and families are not subjected to deportation.
Thank you. One of the priority Republican bills this Congress, H.R. 32, the so-called No Bailout for Sanctuary Cities Act, which has been teed up for floor consideration in the coming weeks, would gut billions in federal funding for states and localities, including funding for essential programs like public safety, education, and transportation. if states and localities are not able to aid the Trump administration in federal immigration enforcement. Would cutting federal funding from local and state police departments help or hurt public safety?
It would make public safety much worse.
Can you talk about the real-world impact that these cuts would have on the ability of law enforcement to protect their communities?
Absolutely. When I was in charge of Baltimore City Human Resources, we had a special unit that applied for federal grants because we need the funding, we need the resources, not just for law enforcement activities and duties, but for other important things like youth programs, which are extremely important, other services, mental health services. There are many types of critical services that our communities need.
Okay, thank you. As we've heard today, my Republican colleagues talk as if all immigrants are criminals. Could you tell us whether that's true, and whether, in fact, the studies show that the crime rate among immigrants is lower than the crime rate among native-born American citizens?
Studies show that among the immigrant community, it's lower.
So most immigrants are not criminals?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I yield
Time
back.
has expired.
To destroy relationships between the immigrant community and local police officers would be detrimental to public safety?
Sure. It would be detrimental in a number of ways. Number one, I spoke earlier to being successful in identifying victims of crime, having crime reported, being successful during the investigation of those crimes so that we can hold those violent offenders accountable. But also it would be detrimental in the loss of critical resources that we desperately need among our law enforcement agencies around the country. And again, I want to speak to the uniqueness of every jurisdiction. We should have the ability to develop our own strategies that would work within those particular communities that have their own special needs. A loss of critical resources would devastate us in the law enforcement community in a number of ways. So I took an oath, not just to the Constitution, but to the people that I serve, to protect everyone who's in my community, no matter what their status is. And in order for me to do that, and my comrades to do that, you've got to have trust. You've got to build trust if you're going to get the information you need so that people aren't fearful when coming forward to report. They don't want to be victimized. They don't want their friends and family victimized. They want people held accountable, and they want to be able to come forward and trust us and not fear them or their friends being deported from the United States.
Thank you. Are you familiar with the U visa, a visa for victims of crimes who cooperate with law enforcement or governmental officials in the investigation or prosecution of criminal activities? And if so, do you think that they're helpful?
Yes, I am familiar with it, and they are helpful. Of course, the police officer has to take the initiative in filling out the paperwork when we're dealing with the victim to make sure that they're able to stay in the community and in the country.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Mr.
Major Franklin, thank you for being here. Let me ask you, would cutting funding for these essential programs help or harm public safety in your opinion?
Cutting the funding for those programs would definitely harm. It's no doubt about it. And the services are extensive, and that's one of the things that the Law Enforcement Action Partnership helps communities do, cities and towns, is to manage their limited resources and find other ways of dealing with community issues and problems other than law enforcement.
Thank you. And in your experience, how do welcoming policies affect domestic violence survivors and other crime victims?
So outside of my law enforcement experience, when I was with the Baltimore Police Department, I was also the president of an organization called Turnaround Incorporated. That was an advocacy organization for victims of domestic violence and child sexual assault and so on. And working with that organization for 4 years opened my eyes quite a bit as to the importance of have welcoming policies for the immigrant community as it relates to domestic violence and ensuring that they get the services they need, especially since it is very difficult for them to come forward when they are victims or their family members are victims. So you've got to have that trust built between those communities and the police.